Good evening, everybody, or good morning, or whatever may be the case for you. This video is going to be my little spiel about Robert Gnuse's article, 7 Gay Texts. But first, you want to see my pets. Again, these are probably not the pets you wanted to see, but I think they are even prettier than my cats if you look at them. And this is how they really look without a filter. That one's bright yellow. That's a Gnuse. These are all cichlids from they're captive bred and everything, so but they're originally from Lake Malawi in Eastern Africa, and there's just an insane variety of cichlids like this who live there, and they're extremely colorful, extremely bright. My spouse says this is the ugliest one. It's also the one I've had the longest. It's ugly because it's sterile. It's sterile. You see how these look? These are their mature colors, but when pet shops get them in to sell them, they're a lot smaller, you know. So they want to be able to sell them. They want them looking good, so the suppliers feed these fish hormoned food with hormones in it to make their pituitary glands more active. So they can look really bright, really small, but the problem with that is it can make them harder to color up later, and it can even make some of them sterile. And this is one of the fish that got sterile from eating hormone food. And I believe it too, because it's the greediest little thing. The greediest thing. I like its attitude. It stares at me all day. All day long, saying, "Don't you love me anymore? Where's my food? If you loved me, surely you would feed me." And it just sits there looking at me like that. The whole time I was sitting in my chair over here. So this will be what you're looking at for this lecture. I'm sorry if it's inconvenient, or if it doesn't help you grasp the lecture very well, but this is what I'm doing for this video, at least. I mean, I have a feeling it might be more helpful if I did this with a PowerPoint or something, but I'm kind of low tech, unfortunately. But if you have any issues, if you really need a PowerPoint, this and that, I'm absolutely taking suggestions, you know. So, yeah, welcome again to my channel. My fish channel, Elizabeth's Fish Rescue. There's actually some really good fish channels on YouTube where you can look up enormous fish, like Ohio Fish Rescue. You can see fish that get, several feet long. But anyway, enough about fish. I'd like to, well, you're in luck. It's this horrible little thing. Look up here. Are you a good boy? Alright, he's satisfied. Oops. Okay. Yes, I have notes. So, I just want to say a few words to orient you to this text. 7 Gay Texts, Robert Gnuse. I encountered this text some years ago when I was personally very interested in... this cat's biting me on the back. Tuna. I swear to God. Sorry about that. So, I encountered this text back when I was very interested in proving the compatibility of the Bible with loving, consensual relationships between LGBTQIA plus people. And I've assigned this specific text to you all because, I mean, just in case any of you have hang-ups about the morality of queer relationships, or whether any queer theology can be a truly Christian and scripturally founded theology. And in some branches of Christianity in the United States, certain texts of terror in the Bible have been, and they're currently being used to destructive effect. So these texts, when they're wielded in bad faith, they terrorize, or rather the people using the text terrorize queer people to prevent them from, whether intentionally or unintentionally, preventing them from loving themselves, affirming their identities, having equal rights, and being with who they love. Now, these texts are also commonly called clobber texts because they are used to clobber or stifle debate over the compatibility of Christianity with queerness altogether. I mean, you ever have somebody slap you with a Bible verse and say, "This proves it, and I won't hear anything else"? Well, that'd be, if you're talking about gay rights, that would be a clobber text. So, I think that it's necessary to address this possible sticking point for many Christians before moving forward. But in doing so, I'm only going to show one side of the issue. I'm only going to show the side that affirms the compatibility of Scripture with loving queer relationships. Now, I do this intentionally because at the end of the day, I consider any move to harm a queer person, mentally, emotionally, or physically, using a biblical text, is at best misguided and at worst morally reprehensible and malicious. As I've said to you all before in class, I have certain principles. I think this is really important. You have to have certain principles by which you distinguish good theology from bad theology. What principles are guiding your biblical interpretation, your interpretation of what good theology is? And one of my principles is that a good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. Now, if a particular theology brings about greater human flourishing, greater regard and care for the most vulnerable, if in fact a theology is oriented to Christ as the preeminent among the outcasts, then that to me is a good theology. It must be a good tree because it produces good fruits. And I mean, the ultimate principle guiding my sense of what is good, like I can say a good tree bears good fruits, but what is good? Oh, you're in luck. It's my cat Snickers. Snickers. Look how sweet. But the principle by which I determine what is good is I see good as roughly aligned with whatever follows from being oriented toward, like in my own theological reflection, and being oriented toward Christ as preeminent among the outcasts. What is oriented toward the flourishing of the outcast, I consider that to be good. A good tree bears those good fruits. But in contrast, if a particular theology permits abuse and violence, they having a fight. Don't mind the shoes. Stop that. They act so bad, they argue like children. But in contrast, so if a particular theology is permitting abuse and violence against a vulnerable population, if it's turned away from Christ as revealed in the outcast, then that is bad theology. It bears bad fruits. So quite simply, for me, the ethical consequences of a theology determine its legitimacy. And I think that's worth thinking through for yourselves, because we've talked about in class before, what determines the legitimacy of a theology. You saw for James Cone, theologies are only legitimate if they address the liberation of the oppressed in some way or another. Because for him, God is the God of the oppressed. So I'll be thinking about like that question. How do you determine what's legitimate and what's not in your in reflecting theologically and interpreting Scripture? But to get back to the topic at hand, I can't say that I can't say that I find anti-gay Christian theologies to be legitimate, to be sound, morally or theologically. Now, this may be a controversial opinion, or it may not be. Of course, I don't expect you to just pick it up because I said so. I don't want to see in your responses you all just picking up on my opinion because I said it. I respect your opinions. I want to hear, what you think and how you feel. Don't just try to please me. So I don't expect you to just pick up what I say or whatever. I hope that instead you'll go on an intellectual journey during our 2 weeks studying queer theology, and then as you proceed through your life. I hope that if you're not already there, you'll be on this intellectual journey towards accepting the notion that Christians ought to be embracing queer people and queer theology wholeheartedly, as good and as sound in themselves, without reservations. That's radical love. Radical love. So, to this end, like furthering your intellectual journey, or like if you're already there, like helping other people along on their intellectual journey, I've assigned Robert Gnuse's 7 Gay Texts article. So Gnuse offers responses that are grounded in careful biblical interpretation, defending the compatibility of loving queer relationships with the Bible, as well as defending the Bible itself against claims that it is an unambiguously oppressive book for queer people. So you might say that Gnuse is engaged in the task of apologetics. Apologetics in Christian theology, it refers to the defense or justification of Scripture and of the gospel message in general. So Gnuse's approach to apologetics is a refreshingly unconventional one on this subject. Many exegetes against the critique that biblically based homophobia is morally wrong have defended the Bible as a correctly homophobic book, as a thoroughly and correctly homophobic book. But Gnuse, in contrast, he is arguing against the critique that the Bible can only harm queer people. He defends the Bible as a book that does not actually ever condemn. I don't know if you hear that, but there's a cat throwing up behind me. Lord. House is a mess. So Gnuse is defending the Bible as a book that does not in any place condemn loving queer relationships. So to help y'all out, I want to briefly lay out Gnuse's responses to each of the 7 texts. But I'll do it briefly. There's so much more there, I hope you'll dig into it yourselves. The first text is Genesis 9:20-27, the story of Noah and his son Ham. This text, it's a really interesting text because it has been used in multiple contexts to oppress whole groups of people. Like, this was a text that was frequently cited when people, I guess back, I mean, they probably still cite it today, but maybe not as openly as previously. But this same text, story of Noah and Ham, was used to, like, say that Ham represents black people